Hello to everyone who is joining us early, and thank you so much for another one of our PropMoto webinars. Really excited about this one, and I know we have a lot of people interested. I am happy to say that this is actually the most popular webinar we have ever hosted. So I would like to think that that is from my new haircut, but not so naive. I know that the return to the office is a huge topic right now and something that everyone seems to be talking about. No one seems to know definitively much, but hopefully we can look to places like Australia that have really done a good job to maybe see our future. You know, much as Australia always seems to have the first, New Year's celebration, we can kind of see how that pans out. It's also seems to be the first in post-pandemic world. So a lot to learn, a lot to go over. We're going to wait a couple minutes so everybody can get in, get situated, get your drinks. If you got your side work to do at the same time, we understand multitasking is part of the new work from home experience, as we all know. But this is something that we will be chatting about. We're certainly interested in what everyone has to say. Instead of a Q&A at the end, I'm just going to go ahead and take questions on the fly as you guys come, as long as they're good. We might get a lot, so if I don't get to them, I apologize. Any compliments for me will certainly push you to the top of the list, so feel free to throw those in there. There's as you can see, a Q&A here. We will also have this video available later. If anyone has to jump off, you can certainly finish. And likewise, if anyone has follow-up questions, feel free to email me and I can connect you with either one of these fine young men here. It's franco@propmoto.com. If when this is all over, you can certainly get me there. So let's go ahead and get started. Obviously, everyone knows why we are here is to learn about the future of the office. And I think we hopefully will get some insights from a place that has done spectacularly well. Australia is kind of globally recognized as one of the best insofar as how they've handled this pandemic. I have in my notes here that says there are only 30 active cases of COVID-19 and 13 hospitalizations. And as someone who lives in Southern California, where it is very much not the case, we have still quite a few cases, lots of hospitalizations. ICU beds is obviously, I think no one before this thought that we would think so much about ICU beds, but that is still something that is very much on the top of all of our minds. And so, as we get into this, we will certainly talk about a little bit about what Australia has done to get there, but I think more so we are going to focus on what this return looks like, right? What they are seeing. So I'd love to intro my two guests here. I have James Franklin. He is the Chief Customer Officer at Space IQ. They're a global workspace technology provider. Hi, James.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you. And we also have Craig Maroney. He's head of facilities at Transurban. They're a global roads operator. How's tomorrow?
Thank you. It's good. It's good.
Great. Good to know. So, all right, well, Craig, let's start with you as the Aussie here. I really want to understand what the return to work not only looks like now, but kind of how it rolled out, right? I think there's a lot of international people on this call, and so everyone is a little on a different journey on the way to the end of the pandemic. So, talk to me about as this rolled out, what happened, and as you kind of started to see things come back. Right, how you started thinking about the return, and how people actually started to return.
Yep. So I might start with a little bit about who we are. So essentially, Transurban operate across Canada, the US, Philippines, and Australia. So we're a global roads operator. Have about 14,500 people globally. So 4,000 of those are people who work in offices around those countries, and the rest are actually people who support our road networks. So like everyone else, we have situations in each of those markets, each of those regions, and we're at different points of return. So for my role specifically, and for our organisation, we've had to think about how do we have an enterprise response to something that is different in every single market and has that challenge there. People in Australia, so I'll talk specifically about Australia, we really started to return in each market at a very different time. So for example, our Victorian market, which is where our head office is, we started to return late last year, we were in a lockdown. So our state government drove a lockdown for around 6 months, and that kept people at home. So we overnight had to move our entire Victorian workforce, which is about 2,500 people, to working in the office at a desk. Luckily, we had mobiles, to working from home. And so what we did is we started working through that. What does that mean for us? And we'll talk a little bit about the detail further in. But essentially for that market, we came back to work late last year. And in New South Wales and Queensland, which are our other two Australian markets, or where our offices are, it sort of has staggered and gone on and off depending on what's happening in those markets. But they've been fairly much back at work since mid last year. So really in a sort of different places in different states, based on the sort of activity or the COVID response in those markets with government.
Right. And what kind of milestones did you recognize as, as people start to hit seeing people come back?
So I think the first milestone was actually driven nationally by our federal and state governments. So they really structured a process around helping businesses return to work. So they gave some guidance about what were the expectations of our people returning to work. So things like wearing masks, catching public transport, that type of thing. The milestones we really started to witness was more about the personal impact of COVID on people's lives. So that's where in different markets, if they had been at home for a while, we saw a much slower return to work, because there's that just initial I think concern about leaving the safety of their home where they've been locked up for a while and going back out into the public, going to the work, and really building up that level of confidence. In those markets that were locked down for a shorter period or didn't have quite that lockdown that the others did, people sort of went back to work quite quickly. So our average attendance, for example, in our Queensland market on an average day sits about 75% of the workforce go to an office. At the moment, we're sitting up around the 55%, so quite high there. In Victoria, where people were locked down for a much extended period of time, previous attendance was about 70%. We're sitting down around 12% return to work at the moment. And we built quite a structure around what are the steps of returning to work. We had benchmarks on percentages and that type of thing, square meters, ratios, all that type of thing. And we actually haven't used any of it yet. We're sort of letting people come back because we haven't hit any of those benchmarks. So it really is driven by our individuals, our employees want to come back to work, which has been something that was a bit of a realization through the process.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me how, even from the outsider, we'd think, oh, all Australia would kind of be in the same boat. This is so geographically specific, right? Areas that, greater New York City struggled a lot more than right across the river in New Jersey, and therefore, it might come back. James, is that something you guys are seeing? Obviously, you guys have pretty global reach and have clients everywhere. So what have you kind of seen about the correlation between how hard a place was hit, how long they're on lockdown, and how they can return?
There's certainly very similar themes. I had a conversation with a customer just today, and I love citing some of the metrics and learnings that Craig has shared with us and now with all the attendees. And as I was relaying that story, this customer in London said over 90% of our workforce that comes into the office in the London location leverages public transportation. And they found number one concern as they sampled their workforce around the return to the office event was, we're not comfortable with public transportation. Take a customer in certain parts of the US, and you talk about public transportation being anxiety, and they're like, we're not sure what you're talking about, because there is a lack of public transportation. So there's a lot of different drivers, and it's very location specific. And that's where there's a lot of complexity as you're trying to put together a global return to the office event and strategy. It takes an awful lot of understanding of your employee base, and it takes an awful lot of outreach and a lot of data that you need to be aware of and manage.
Yeah, and I mean, it's obviously very location specific, but also very, individual specific, right? So some people, I know I've seen things that said, if you have kids at home, right, you're more likely to want to go back to the office. If you have a home office, that might be a lot easier compared to roommates. So, Craig, as you kind of saw people coming back and you started to learn more about their stories, what were some of the things that surprised you about what was keeping people away from the office and what was actually bringing them in?
I think what we found is public transport, very similar to what James said. So we did a survey. We've completed a number of surveys with all our employees globally. So every 90 days we do another survey just to see how people are going and collect those concerns. But I think a separate piece of data, which I'll talk to now, is we actually went out to our customers. We surveyed 20,000 customers globally to say, how has the COVID pandemic impacted your considerations about returning to work, your place of work? And the numbers are really, really interesting. So what we found is 86% of people have said globally from that survey, they will return to work. So there is not this intention to work from home forever. However, 25% of them said they will never catch public transport again, which for us as a roads operator is quite concerning because we have to make sure we've got the capacity to support that type of return to work. The other interesting figure that came out of it is that 42% of people out of the 20,000 people surveyed globally said they don't expect to come out of this and back into a COVID normal return to work for another 12 months. And they're talking about post-vaccine 12 months, which is a long time. So that was some really interesting data that we just completed only a few months ago and has really sort of, we've been cross-matching that with what our people are saying, and it nearly lines up exactly. Our biggest piece of concern about returning to work is public transport. And our offices are all in capital cities, right in the heart of big cities. So it is quite a concern for, I think, everyone, and that's your biggest concern. The other thing we sort of saw was themes. And so there is a gender skew as well. There was a hesitation from female employees returning to work. It was about a 12% increase on our male employees, which was another interesting piece of data we discovered. And some of the concerns, so we do a lot of free texting, is cleanliness. It's really about understanding the office I'm coming back into. How have we changed? How are you going to protect me? And so one of the things, again, like a big corporate, we had a lot of structure around policies and procedures, and we did all this work and documentation that was more to manage our risk. And what we discovered is they want to see that. They want to feel that the organisation has plans in place for what happens if someone is a positive case and they're in the workplace. How are we going to respond to that? They want to see right down to the raw nitty-gritty. So we moved from that sort of traditional, that's all managed by risk and safety, it's all held close and it's all in the background. We now publish that very openly on our internet, and everyone can see if there was a situation or that type of thing, what would happen. We publish our cleaning standards. We publish the locations of every box of tissues, hand sanitizer, first aider. Like, it's really changed the way we engage with our people globally to say these are the protections we're putting around to make sure your workplace is safe when you come back. Mm-hmm. The other piece that we've had the biggest concerns raised on is lifts. Surprisingly, lifts are the biggest bottleneck outside of public transport in getting into our buildings, into our tenancies. People don't want to get stuck in a box that's got 4 walls close to 20 other people. So that's been quite an interesting challenge of working through that, and there's some technology that we're sort of looking at to resolve that.
Yeah, it is kind of expanding the thinking of the office industry into not just what happens inside of it, right? But the whole customer journey, right? Getting there. One of the listeners has put in Seattle, most of my staff get angry about non-compliance on public transportation, and that causes a lot of stress. And yeah, I think that's something that we all have to remember is that, depending on your location as well, some places are much more stringent with compliance. So, if they aren't, obviously that's going to handicap your ability to get people onto public transportation and therefore into your building. I want to focus on the survey that you had talked about here, Craig, a little bit. Another one of our listeners has said, we are putting together a survey for our tenants now. Any suggestions or templates that you can recommend? How did you kind of think about the survey? And I'm going to add to that, at what point do you kind of add some data that you are likely collecting about your workplaces as well? So there's that qualitative and quantitative aspect at the same time.
So we approached our survey from a couple of fronts, one being the safety front. We know safety is front of mind for our people. And so we're using the survey not only to capture their thoughts on when and how they'll return to work and what their concerns are, but also how they're working now. So one of our biggest concerns is ergonomics at home. How are people keeping themselves safe at home? So we address it from a safety front primarily, and that's where the survey comes from. We try and understand what the fears are of getting people to come back to work, and then how we can respond to those fears and communicate that. And the other part is what do they think or want to change in the workplace? And I think that's a fairly important fact, that the role of the workplace in organisations now has changed forever. I'm a firm believer that we used to have offices that supported a fixed style of working, in the sense of people come in, complete an activity and move on to the next pace and complete another activity. Primarily offices now for us, and I think this has come out from our survey data, is around collaboration. People are coming in to spend time with other people or groups and plan and do strategies, and that real interaction in the workplace, which for us, we've already started rebuilding our entire design framework of how and when what we do and what we put into our buildings. So it's really, our surveys are trying to understand those things that are in our people's head, that are driving their concerns, driving their fears about returning to work outside of what's happening in their local environments, and also about what they think the workplace needs to do to support them into the future. And that's been very interesting. I think one of the percentages that we've seen is traditionally, we did these types of surveys before COVID around people's working styles and environments. Traditionally, being able to do focus work in the office was about 30% of people's sort of what they would like to do in the office. That has dropped down to 5%. And when we've asked the question about why and where, people are now saying, well, the new norm shows me I can work from home, so I'm going to do my focus work at home, and then I'm going to come into the office and use it for collaboration, for social interaction, for that real things you can't do, or that we have done for 12 months via VC, but it would be better face to face. So it's quite a shift there. And I think the other thing is about us about the environment. So we're now challenged whether do we keep building offices in cities? Do we start looking about moving them out into other sections of the city, so outer perimeters? Do we go regional? Do we go outside the markets and think about what's the best place for our offices? Is it just a small premise in a city that's where the executives sit and everyone works out in more the suburban areas? And that gives them access to things like parking. So some real interesting challenges there for us to think through.
Now, I want to hear from you, James, here, since you power so much of this data that offices are likely using to learn about things. How do you kind of help people like Craig, who has done an incredible job, it sounds like, of really understanding their employees, right? Doing these regular surveys, bringing to them some actual data about, because again, I think we all understand there's a difference between what people say and what they actually do, right? What they say is important to them. And when it comes, push comes to shove, what they actually come to the office to do.
So we're seeing a couple of broad shifts that you need really good insight and data in order to understand these trends. First is everybody's shifting to a more agile environment as we make this transition. Craig said more people working from home. I believe you said 25% said we're never taking public transportation, and doing the math, it was like 15% said they want to stay at home completely, right? So, but in general, everybody's assuming that at some part of the work week, a big portion of their workforce is going to stay working at home, at least for a while. So you're going to have to know who's going to be reserving what and how and when and what the business rules are for that. And there's an awful lot of complexity that's emerging with it being so pervasive. And there's questions like, who owns that decision, right? Is it HR? Is it the business? Is it real estate? Lots of answers to get figured out on that side. But what is absolutely understood is we have to have a really clear understanding of what space, where, and what groups are allowed to use it, put the business rules in place, and then make it really easy for employees to interact with the space, to grab it and find what they need when they need it. The second big thing that we see is we're starting to figure out what the new workplace looks like. And Craig has a great comment. One of the things he said to me not too long ago is this 70-30 split between desk and conference rooms isn't going to cut it anymore, right? We need a new type of space that's collaborative, and it's going to look different than the workplace of today. So how much of that do you need? What is the right different types of space types? how much space do I need in general? Craig already talked about centralized versus decentralized space. As workforce is moving to lots of different locations, where should I have space and what type in order to accommodate the needs? There's been a big centralization push probably in the last decade. Now, in a very quick way, we've seen the opposite, pretty dramatic fashion. So you need a lot of data. You need a lot of data sources. And as people come back to the office, we're going to see a lot more with IoT and sensors. We're going to see a lot more focus on real-time data. Traditionally, our industry has been a bit static or long running. Leases take a long time. I can take some data and take my time to figure out how people are interacting with space. Now we're seeing it more about real time. We talked about ingress, right? Lifts, I had to translate that in my head. That's an elevator. So
Elevator.
Yeah, but that's a big deal, right? That's a real-time issue. And if you don't have a really good understanding of how many people are coming into the space and consuming that and what your egress requirements are, you've got a problem. So all this is where our technology is becoming really important and where it's getting much more complex for organizations to understand what they need to do and figure it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean,
I think,
go on.
I think even talking to that a bit further, James, so that lift was a real-time issue. We saw that loud and clear out of the data from our people. And I think this is where technology really comes to the fore. So there is no other way to change that. You can't sort of set in policies or rules. You have to provide support. So we luckily have partnered with Space IQ on a solution for that, where we now have a lift booking system. So we've sort of said to the people, how many people, what will you feel comfortable with traveling in a lift up and down? And they can do it through an app. We've not yet turned it on. It's been tested. We've done some trials and made sure it's ready to go. But for when our greater workforce is in those buildings where there's a bit more hesitation on coming back to work, we can just flick it on by building. And that gives us that additional sort of level of comfort we can provide our people that we've sort of spent the time building up, having ready to go. And I think that's one of the important things here is facilities and property professionals. We have access to so much technology, so much data, and sometimes we forget it. Sometimes we don't realize there's a lot of things like QR codes and contact tracing, all this stuff out there. But right now we've got that data at our fingertips, from everything from people connecting to Wi-Fi and LAN to people sort of using a printer, opening a locker. Every time they swipe their pass on a door, you've already got that data. So it's about being able to really utilize those to make data-driven insights and be aware, so you can use it for not only contact tracing, but understanding attendance and behaviour. And I think that's one of the most important things where our industry is going to radically shift, is to really look at, okay, what was, and we've got the historical data as well. How did we behave? How did our people behave before? And what do we need to do to support them into the future? And how can we leverage that data to help drive those insights? I think because every company will be totally different. I think it's going to be really important out of this.
Yeah, and I think there's a big change that's happening. Is like you're saying, it's not about just kind of knowing, oh, this area seems to get more use than the other. Obviously, those kind of IoT sensors are still very critical, but now we can actually peg that to exactly who it is, right? It's about making these profiles, and that one about the elevator is really interesting. But in general, I mean, people are making reservations to do almost everything, right? It's not just, oh, I have a conference, I need to make sure the conference room's booked. I mean, people are just saying, I want to sit in a seat at this time from that time. And so you now have all of their information, where they're going, who they're doing. So how do you kind of look at that, right? Of the reservation systems and also the kind of real-time data that's getting pushed out by the sensors in that. James, why don't you start on that one? I'm sure Craig will have some extra.
Yeah, I view it as two sides of the same coin, right? So you're going to be making a reservation, and if we want to know if that person actually used that reservation or not. And so as people are coming in, we want to know what space is most desirable. We want to understand capacity, and we want to know if they actually consume that or not. It's not enough just to know that a reservation's been done. You also want to know if they actually fulfilled that or not. And I think Craig's example is we planned on 25% to come back. And when the day came, only half actually showed up. So let's say those 25% did reservations, that's not good enough. You need to know more about that.
Mhm.
And then even once they're in the space, you want to know how they're using it. And we're going to need new investigative techniques to know how people are leveraging it in order to be productive. If 30% of focus work used to be done in the office, and we know some people are going to prefer to do focus work still in the office, but we know a ton of people aren't, then that means there's a whole bunch of collaborative time. But if we still designed our office space for that 30%, well, it's not going to work, right? So what are people doing when they come back? Where are they going? And how does our space need to change in order to accommodate that? And that's where you hear a lot about activity-based working. We're going to have to really know what the activities are and how people are doing that, and then and adapt accordingly. The more data you have, the better. Whether you're talking badging, in the past, it's interesting. And in the past, your security department, your physical security department may not want to share badging data with real estate. They may say that's PII, we don't want to do it. Now we're getting to the point where they're saying we have to share that because it's a health and safety issue, right? We have to know who's in the building, but then that's going to also cascade into we need more data, whether it's badging, IoT, network derived location, so that we can make this as productive a space as possible for the people that are using it.
Yeah, interesting. Definitely a lot more access to data and people willingly giving up a lot more information. I have a couple questions that came in. I wanted to ask you, Craig. They're really asking what you're starting to see with this return. Do people mostly want this for collaboration space? And if so, do people want to come in at the same time, or do people still want a little bit of space in between, let's say teams that come in?
So it's really interesting because we had a structured approach. We had people mapped to neighborhoods and floors and zones like that. And within the first couple of weeks, we realized that wasn't going to work. It just was not something, it wasn't a behavior that our people wanted to do. It turned them away from coming to work. So what we did is we undid it and we sort of just went, let's just open the gate and see what happens. So we still had the controls in place. And what we're finding is even though people are saying and they're behaving that they want to come into for more collaborative work and also for social interaction, I think I have to be very careful there that I don't think there will be a day where everyone will work from home in some of our organisations, because the value of just the social friendships you build is so important to the relationships you have. But what we've seen is the need of, if you're going to have a collaboration activity, if people are coming in to collaborate on something, there will still be people who want to work from home. So you've got to be able to create environments that support that collaboration in a group or between individuals that can be both local and remote. And that's been really tricky. So we've had to look at things very quickly, such as digital whiteboard technology that can be shared, that type of thing, so that people aren't left out of those collaboration sessions and they don't feel like they have to come to the office. So it's really challenged our thinking on what is the technology in our workplaces and how does it support our people. So it's a bit different. And the other thing we're seeing is, and this is quite an interesting, just a side note I've noticed myself, is the offices are louder. So traditionally you'd have work and there'd be a hum, there'd be activity, but it wasn't loud. I only noticed just yesterday in our office, and I walked between the 10 floors, they're very loud because the people at work are all socializing, they're engaging with each other. That sort of quiet, focused environment is potentially a thing of the past. I'm not saying it's something that's been designed, it's just the way it's working, because people are coming in and they've missed that collaboration. So they're spending the time when they come in to see each other, to engage with each other. So I think there is some value in that. I think that's part of the sell of coming back to work as well for organisations who are challenged on how am I going to get people back. It's that we are social beings. Most of us need that human connection to sort of trigger those relationships, trigger those thoughts. And that's actually the sell point. So we're doing things like morning teas and trying to break it up. I think the realization, once you take the people out of it from a real estate point of view, is our need for real estate will also reduce potentially. I think in most organizations, you're going to have to try and balance that. What is the future square meters we need with how many people are coming to work on an average day? And that's a real challenge. Talking to my peers in the industry, and they're talking about these are now collaborative spaces and we're just going to move away from desks that people sit at, you've still got to give people that balance of, and I think James mentioned it before, some people will still come and work in the office full time, and that's the choice you want to give them. So we have to be very careful about the next steps we take in this process, and I think there's a lot of engagement and leadership required for that.
Yeah, almost in a way, we're seeing a flip flop, right? Instead of the majority of the space, open space for working, the majority is collaborative working. Maybe we have, instead of conference rooms, little work rooms and quiet pods to do some of our thinking in. So another question that came in that I think is really interesting, is there an expectation of, some of the people that they do want still their own space, right? Their own stapler and, drawer full of stuff. Or is it now, hey, we get it, nothing's mine anymore, it's all just part of the hot desking?
There is. So we have seen a return to not people wanting their own desks, but wanting their own assets specifically. And that's just the fear of sanitation, the fear of someone's touched that staple or someone's touched that item, and now I'm going to catch something, I'm going to get ill. And so I think that sits with how, and if you've been in an agile environment before or a hot desking environment, that's how you show and you prove to your people that you're able to sanitize. We were challenged, so we were 100% agile, 100% flexible in our Melbourne office, and we made a very conscious choice to move to desk for your day. So people can still come in, they can choose and book any desk they want anywhere in the building, which is still a flexibility we offer, but we don't, so if you're at the desk for the day, we ask other people not to use it. We've got indicators that show it's been used, and then we've got a cleaning team that are roaming around doing that. So that's changed. That means essentially we don't need more space because you've got the lower attendance, but it does sort of change that dynamic we're now working through, and that is where we're going to rest. I think that's the decision we've made, that's our future, is that we will have desk for your day, and you can pick a desk, and you can still use collaborative zones and things like that. But if you're doing fixed working with a keyboard, mouse and monitors, that will be at one desk for the day. So really, we've had to challenge some of the things because we were so agile of what's that middle ground. There's organisations right now who I'm talking to who are wanting to go back to Craig Moroney sits at desk 1, 2, 3 because of the feedback they're getting from their employees. So I think there's that real balance of being able to give our people a level of comfort that you can keep them safe, and that is all around sanitation. A couple of things we've done to help with that, we've got sanitation stands. Every 16 desks now has a pod, a stand right next to it. It's got sanitizer wipes and hand sanitizer and tissues. And it's all mounted there. The cleaners stock it up all day. So people, if they're feeling like they need to sanitize their hands or their desk is dirty or anything like that, they can do it themselves. So being very visible on the ability for people to keep themselves safe as well is something that I think is really important in these workplaces in the future.
Yeah, I think the communication aspect of this is really fascinating to me now that the workplace is having to be this communicator. Not only are things sanitized, but I'm also thinking about, when you're looking to book a reservation, if the office really is a place for collaborative work, it's not just about, can I find a spot in this office? It's really, can I find a spot in this office close when X is there and this person's there and close to them? And obviously I think that is a huge growth area. But I mean, with this communication, are there some privacy concerns? I see a couple questions here popping up about that, right? How do you make sure that you're sharing everything that people want? And, maybe some people don't want others to know that they're in the office at a certain time. So maybe James, if you could just talk a little bit about how you guys think about the privacy aspect of it.
And we actually have quite a bit of experience in this regard because, customers like Craig in Australia deploy a solution that gives them real-time understanding of location for their staff. And but then there's other places where, like in the EU, where they don't share that. So part of it is cultural, part of it is amount of trust in what people are doing with that data. If they feel like, I'll share my location and I'm fine if my employer knows where I'm at because it's providing a service and it makes for a better, more productive environment for me, right? There may be other locations where there's just not that level of trust or there's even legal ramifications, right? So it's about creating a great work experience for the employees, and the more you know about who's using it where, the better you can do on that regard. But then the other thing, the better you can do about allocating space, right? If you know the departments that are using it, then you're going to make more efficient allocation decisions on that. Part of the way that we manage this is it really has to be based upon what the norms and customs and obligations are by region. In some cases, you may have an approach where you know if someone's there or not, but there's no additional information. Some customers, like I said before, in the past, it's been, you can't share badge data because we think that's sensitive. I'll say that the shift is that's starting to go away. People are starting to realize there's really important business critical information that we need to share. And we also need to create a safe, productive environment for the employee. And the last thing I'll say is all this data is already there, right? So we already know who's in the office. We already know who's joined to the network. We already know who these people are. If anything, it's more about making sure that we're using it effectively, but also we're keeping it safe. Since it's already there.
And I think
we're mindful about it.
And I think from an employee point of view, it's being open and transparent. So we rolled some of the tools out that James is talking about, and they've got a world of functionality you can roll out. And one of the conversations we had, and we actually had an employee group as part of the consultation process, was about that locator, that being able to see where a person is, where they're booked, that type of thing. So two key things came out of that is whilst you may still collect the data and it sits in a system somewhere, there's got to be strict governance over that, and that the governance must protect employees' privacy. And that was a really big thing for us. And so, for example, a leader can't send an email to the facilities team and say, I want to see all the swipe badge data for Joe Blogs. It's just not tolerated. They can do that, but there is a governance process as to why. Why do you need it? Is it about performance management? That's not the way to do it. We'll give you some tools and training on how you can do that differently. The other thing is the employee's ability to opt in and opt out. And I think that's critically important. So if we're going to build environments that we collect this data so we gain an understanding, you have to give your people the flexibility that they may not want the information that the desk they're booking or what they're doing in the workplace tracked, and that's the strong word that you hear people talking about, so that they can opt out of that being visible to others. And I think that's really, really important because whilst it is critical for us, for our understanding of everything from contact tracing to usage of the workspaces and the workspace types, you also have to give your people that level of privacy and trust with you as well. So that's been the two biggest things we've had. And one of the funny things is, and this came from our CEO, he's a very Ocker gentleman, and we were talking about the release of this locator tool and being able to show where people were, and we had the choice of deploying it to mobile phones and desktops, and his challenge was, and he piped straight up and said, well, I don't want someone knowing I'm sitting in the second cubicle in the bathroom. And so we had to have that conversation about, well, this is how it will be governed and this is how we do it, and so those areas can be blocked out. And it's just having those transparent conversations and telling your people about that, telling them why you're doing it, and being really open and honest. If they get that level of trust, you'll find there's more acceptance to it. We've had, I think, out of our 14,500 people, we've had 2 people opt out. So that's pretty good evidence that as long as you're really transparent about why and what you're doing with the data, they're not that concerned. So yeah.
I'm having some interesting questions coming in here. Obviously, we all want to encourage people to come to the office, right? We've built these beautiful spaces and we believe in their the ability to make you more productive and more collaborative. But, I think it is also important to not penalize people that maybe don't want to come back, right? I think giving that flexibility, I think, could actually be a benefit of a lot of companies, right? Because, you can offer that to people who might, live far or just not have the facilities to come in. So how do you think about that? Besides, I think, James, you had spoken of kind of being able to whiteboard and, having the ability to bring online people into in-person meetings. What are some of the ways that you can not penalize people if they just don't want to come back to the office?
There's been some really interesting conversations about right now, collaborative work outside the office is easier because everybody's doing it. So once people start coming back to the office, and the ones that are working remotely, we're going to have to see if some of the practices that we've developed actually persist, or if we go back to working from normal, which means if you're the only one that's dialing in, and we remember all the jokes about, cutting in and out, and you can't
You're on
speak.
mute.
Exactly. So this is where probably the focus to activity-based working is going to become really important. And we're going to have to understand there's certain types of work that are best done in different types of environments. And we need to tailor our space to make sure it's most conducive to the type of work that's going on. If you're doing annual planning, I suspect coming to the office is going to be a better productive experience. But if you're doing maybe if you're doing a different type, weekly meetings, maybe those can be extraordinarily productive with a mixed environment of people remote and people in the office. But we just have to have some new norms and behaviors to accommodate that.
Yeah. And I think on that, it's actually this is where the leadership decisions come in. So again, what we had in the past, I think, is gone, and we now need to establish for each organisation what are the new norms, what are those expectations, both in the return to work period and post, I will call it, vaccine. So once we're back into that future norm, not the new norm. And so what are the expectations on our organisations from our leaders as to how often people come into work? Can people work from home full time? What are those key activities that we expect people to come in for? So there's some quite serious challenges there, and we are in those conversations at the moment, because there is that real want, and I can understand all leaders want to have their people come back and be able to wrap their arms around them and see them again and treat them as a team. But that may not be right for everyone. So it's trying to balance that, what's right for your people, with what are the success or the things you need to do to achieve success. And so that's a real big challenge, and that will change from every organisation with every different type of executive leader as to what's going to be right for them and their business. And I think they're the conversations we should be having now about what do we want to achieve, what's the aim of returning to work, and why and when, and how do we support it. And that may change whether some people do work for organisations. The return to work of one organisation will be different to another. And because of that, people may change organisations, the cultures will change. And so it really is quite a challenging conversation around that people piece now that I think we all are facing into and need to face into to be ready to go when the world does open up again, and we're sort of deciding, do we want to make people come back? Do we want to entice people to come back? How will people come back are the things we've really got to start nutting out now.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me is this connection between, we talk about the future of office, but I think really what we're talking about is the future of office work, right? And what this means, how people are working and how people are interacting with their work. And so much, any little tweak that you do to this is going to affect company culture. I know I interviewed a researcher who, said that from what they had seen, the younger employees generally wanted to return to the office sooner. And this, it was a total narrative violation in my mind, right? Young people are cool and hip, and they should be able to work from Starbucks and no problem. But the reason was that these younger people wanted to climb the corporate ladder, right? And they saw this as a key advantage. If I go in every day and if I sit at the front of the class, I know that for a fact that this is going to give me maybe some more touch points with my boss. So I guess, how can we think about the way that this affects culture, and, how do we make sure that, bringing people back, some people not, hierarchies won't become, cliques won't start to develop, right? I think there is a push to make sure that by splitting the office into these two classes, the work from home and the not, that we still can bring everybody together on this, how everybody wants, right? This kind of flattened hierarchy type culture.
And we have pulled that data from our survey, and I think to be very careful, I try not to use demographics in conversations, but we've seen, and if I look at the attendance data, so we map those who's in the office against the age brackets, we are seeing the younger sort of millennials returning to work sooner than those in the other sort of age brackets. And in digging into that, it is a social interaction as well. They're social beings. They like coming to work. They like being with their colleagues and friends and having that buzz of an environment that they don't get. So I was very surprised at the demographic data. It's quite interesting because we assumed, I think a lot of people would, that your leaders, your executive will be the first ones in the door. They're not. It's not what we've seen. And I know that from my peers as well. We've seen that quite interesting shift.
But it's also not an all or nothing, right? I think the norm is somewhere in the middle. It's going to be a hybrid model. And so regardless, we're going to have to get good at building, more purposeful locations and workspace that's more suited to the activity. And I go back to we're seeing this quite a bit, is this move to more decentralized locations, smaller locations, more purposeful, and more suited to a hybrid model. Craig, I'm curious about your thoughts, but it seems like there's a pretty pervasive focus on moving to that kind of layout.
There is, and I think it's interesting. I hear a lot of talk about hot desking at the moment across all of the industries globally, and I think it's something we have to be careful because what it's doing is essentially not going to the core of what people want to work, how they want to work. It's just trying to fix something with what people think is a quick way, and I think what we really need to do before we even implement a plan like that is engage with our people, talk to our people, understand what their expectations are of the future work, and try and build the right solution around that. I think naturally, as property people, we think we know what our people want. We try and build solutions for them, but the world has changed, and we have to actually validate that and have those conversations to build the right environment that will support the culture we're trying to build in our organizations.
Yeah, in my mind, an office's effect on productivity, effect on culture are all something that buildings will more and more be able to inform companies about, right? This is like a part of the service of an office is this kind of learning, this, this learning over time. There's a lot of talk here about location, right? And you kind of hit on it earlier, do we want to keep in central business districts? Do we want to look for a hub and spoke? Talk to me about your thinking about this. We've written a good amount on it, and the thing that's always interesting in my mind is that I think a hub and spoke or a decentralized office model makes a lot of sense. It would probably give people less the commute, shorter commutes, they can get to it more easily. But on the other hand, if we really are saying that the office is for collaboration, well, does that mean that now you have to make sure that you're in the right office and the right spoke, right? When we do have this kind of central, downtown hub, it does seem like you could probably feed, are more likely to be there with your colleagues than if it was spread out. So Craig, how are you kind of thinking about the future of where you put these offices?
So we're I think, looking at it from a real co-location point of view. So whilst this conversation is all about our people and returning to work, there is also the piece about your customer and stakeholders as an organisation. So we explored it. We had one of our landlords talk about partnering with us and moving us out into a regional area and covering the cost because they wanted to secure an extended lease with us. However, we very quickly realised two things there. One was that we've got stakeholders and customers who need to come and see us and interact with us, and it's important we've got a presence there. But also that some of our people like working in those outer burbs, and we're very lucky in most cities we have multiple workplaces. So it's really trying to look at what are the opportunities to create those functional locations that support not only your people but your customers and partners as well. And so that may mean you reduce the city footprint and hire a smaller space somewhere out. We've been doing, just in this last couple of weeks, we've actually asked everyone to send us their postcodes. Now, we keep postcodes for our employees or zip codes, but we don't ever get it for our contingent workers, and contingent workers make up 65% of our workforce, so contractors. And so we've asked that to really map out, okay, if we've got 20% of people in this city living over here, is there a great opportunity to find a lease space out there and build just some collaboration areas? So it wouldn't be an office per se, it'd be a place where at least they don't have to come to the city to do that co-location and collaboration, and hopefully also work around where our stakeholders and customers are. So it's sort of trying to start exploring that now. Like a lot of organisations, last decade has been all about consolidation and really leveraging those large leases or reducing OPEX costs. I think now that's changing and we have to revisit that again. And so I think the city location will most probably always be there for a lot of your mid to larger corporates because of their stakeholders, governments, partners. How many of your employees go and work in there, I think will be a change. And do you have all your customer call center in there as well, or do you co-locate them somewhere else? That and I think there's also opportunities here with local councils and communities, so different government groups to look at, well, what happens if we move to 30% or 40% of our people out into this area? So it might be a local regional area or something like that. How can we partner with you? How do we build this? How do we create jobs? And that's a long-term game. That isn't something we're going to do overnight. It's something we've got to, as real estate professionals, really think through that location strategy.
Yeah, and a lot of people here are asking about, is this just a transition period, right? At what point do we know when we've landed on the new office? So both when looking at making location decisions, or even just looking to build out your space, right? Rebuild your space. At what point do you say, okay, we think we know where we are, right? Where's the change has stopped, and we're to the point where we can really start spending some money on it?
Mm-hmm. I think, and this is something as real estate professionals we're not good at. Continuous improvement is a gap for us as an industry. We tend to design and build something that lasts 10 to 15 years, and that's not the way either the world or our people operate anymore. They expect things to evolve to support them functionally. You think about just technology alone, what we install in a building right now will be obsolete in 4 years' time. So it's how do we create, how do we occupy and create or co-create spaces that can evolve as our people and our businesses evolve as well? I think that's something we now need to challenge, to say, this is a point in time, this is what our people want. But in 4 years' time, that's going to change again. And so how do we ensure we've got flexibility within those structures and spaces to evolve again? We might have a lease that takes 10, 12, 15 years, but it doesn't mean you're going to have the same furniture in there that whole time. It might not be large cost either. We're not talking about you're going to demolish it and rebuild it every 4 years. It's just about making sure that space is able to evolve with our people and the way our businesses operate, because it is going to change. I think those sort of fit outs that last the 7 to 12 years that we all used to do is a thing of the past now. We actually have to evolve a bit more often. And that means some smarter logic around asset management and budgeting and capitalisation. But I think that's, we're moving into a new world that a lot of our industry is going to have to really think about, how do we do that effectively?
Absolutely. And then, a lot of that investment happening is in tech, right? And so, James, how do you help your clients understand how to future-proof this, right? How to build this tech stack that, that's one of the beautiful things about technology, right? A software update can really change things much more quickly than, a hammer and nails. So how do you help people understand how to build something that can evolve with their workspace?
And the good thing is that a lot of the tools and techniques that are being adopted now and that we need are ones that have been around for a long time and have been championed in different regions, like in Australia. So this shift to agile is all about making sure that you have good visibility and transparency into your space, and you have the ability to manage it at the appropriate level, so that it's you got to move beyond this dedicated one-to-one seating model, and you have to go to a more flexible, agile environment. And clearly, we have great technology to do that. And lots of customers have done a phenomenal job for it. The difference now is everyone is doing it. It's great to engage with your employees, the people that are the customers for your space. And what's wonderful now is we have great tools, and everybody's trying to adopt these tools. And no matter what happens going forward, we're never going to lose the capability of engaging with our employees to understand what do they need. I saw someone mentioned we need to co-create with our employees. I love that, right? So engaging your employee base is fantastic and will pay benefits on an ongoing basis. And then lastly is we need more data, we need more data sources, and we need to put it into a place where we can properly analyze it and gain insights from what this data is telling us. Good examples of that on an ongoing basis. Some customers have done great at it. The difference now is everyone is saying, I need to have good insights into how much space I need, what type of space I need, and where should that space be. And I have to figure it out quickly because we're in a rapid transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this transformation is happening quickly, but luckily, like you say, we do. I mean, I know the conversation before the pandemic was, how do we get people to adopt our, to download our app and to engage with it? And that seems to be gone, right? It seems not only do people have to, but it seems like they want to, right? I think everybody, probably some of the reason that this webinar has been so popular is that everybody seems to have an opinion, right, about what the future of the office should look like and what it should be and how it's best suits them. So certainly I think there will be no, there's no shortage of opinions on this, but obviously mixing that with some real-time data is certainly the smart decision. So, all right, Craig, well, I'd love you to maybe just give me a quick little prediction about, where you think from what you've seen, what you think the kind of future of your office will look like when you finally settle on it.
So I think from a people point of view, we're going to have, so we're currently sitting about 40% of our space being collaborative. I think that's going to be up around the 65%. So I think we're going to see a shift into collaborative spaces. We've been toying with and got some examples up and running of open collaboration spaces, which are just within the working environment. They're working really well. But I think one of the big things is those enclosed large format collaboration spaces. So where you've got a space where people have technology, whiteboards, I won't say they don't have to be rooms, but they have to be sort of sound insulated where people can do things together. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So gone are the days where you might have a 2 or 4 and an 8-person meeting room across a 1,000 squares type thing. That's radically going to change. You might have 30 or 40 different types of spaces where 2, 3, 8, 10, 12, 20 people can come together and engage. And that flexibility is going to be so critically important. So I think that's some of the things we're going to have to shift to. I think fixed desk where someone will sit there 8 hours is gone. But you need to be able to give people space to do that work between activities. And I think that's really, really important. So I think one of the things we'll see is that quiet and focused area. We still need to maintain, we still need to give people choice. And I think we're playing and we're trialing on a couple of floors at the moment where one end of the floor is the quiet end and one end is the loud. So we've done away with that hood environment of teams and actually said you can sort of sit wherever, but if you need quiet space, you're at the south end. And if you are a noisy person like me that never shuts up, you're at the north end. And it just gives people that sort of space to do those types of things. So it is really changing that and giving people that flexibility to move around. Again, desk for your day during COVID, but I think being able to sit with other people and just get that cross-pollination of ideas and conversation and everything, that's part of the things that will attract people back to work. I think the other flip side of that, my estimate, if I look at our workforce, we're going to have 10% who most probably won't be coming back to work. We'll have a fairly solid group of people who will see working from home 4+ days a week is going to be part of their return. That's the way they're going to be. And that people will now make decisions on returning to work, being for that collaboration activity or the social interaction and being able to do that cross-pollination of ideas type thing. And tech's absolutely a core part of all of this. We're doing a lot of work in the space specifically and really trying to get our people or help our people have that level of comfort that coming back will be safe. And that is, I think you've all heard it, for me, it is engagement, absolutely. Just keep talking, keep engaging, and that's going to give you the success you need. But don't try and run it from the top because that's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fascinating. I just want to thank, Craig, James for coming on, give us some insight on this. Also want to thank everybody. I mean, I know we didn't even scratch the surface to all your questions, so I apologize for that, but only so many minutes of the webinar. Again, if any of you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to push them to either Craig or James or answer them myself if they're about my new haircut. It's about all I'm expert on. So it's franco@propmoto.com. Also, if you guys like this and you like our content, we are offering a special offer right now. I'm going to push this out into the chat. It's available for 24 hours as a 50% off discount to all of our content. And hopefully you can sign up there and have this every day in your inbox. So thank you all so much, Craig, James. Thanks again.
Thank you, Franco.
Thank you, Franco.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye now.
Yes, bye.